Private Jonah Relocation wasn't supposed to message Commander Viola Ross outside duty hours. Especially not with something like, "If your eyes weren't already violet, I'd say you stole the color from every sunset in the galaxy." He typed it on impulse after a long shift in the medbay of the joint Earth-Vexra outpost Theta 9, nestled in the crimson dunes of the desert moon Xyrus Prime. The base was a patchwork marvel. Human steel and Vexra crystalline alloys fused into a single structure that hummed with both languages and a shared truce forged in the ashes of a near-catastrophic war. Jonah had just finished suturing a plasma burn on a Vexra scout's forearm when the thought struck him. Commander Ross never flinched, never smiled, never removed her ceremonial obsidian gauntlet, but her eyes always lingered on him a fraction too long during briefings. So, after 2 glasses of synth whiskey and 0 common sense, he sent the message through the secure comms channel he definitely shouldn't have had access to. 6 minutes later, a knock sounded at his quarters. Not a chime, not a buzz. A knock, 3 sharp, deliberate raps that vibrated through the reinforced alloy door like a war drum. Jonah's blood turned to ice. He scrambled off his bunk, heart hammering against his ribs. Through the security slit, he saw her. Commander Viola Ross, towering nearly a head above him even in her boots, her amethyst skin gleaming under the corridor's soft amber lights. Her long, snow-white hair braided down one shoulder with silver filaments woven through like starlight. She wore the formal battle dress of a Vexra High Commander. Sleek, black, edged with iridescent thread that shimmered like oil on water. And her expression? Utterly unreadable. Jonah opened the door. "Commander," he said, voice cracking like a recruit on his first drop. I didn't expect." She stepped inside without invitation, the door hissing shut behind her. The scent of ozone and desert spice, her natural musk, flooded the small room. She turned, arms crossed, those violet eyes narrowing. "You sent me a poetic message, Private Relocation." Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck, heat rising up his face. "I figured you'd delete it, or report me, or vaporize me with your ocular plasma beams. Do you even have those?" A flicker, just a flicker, of something crossed her face. Amusement? "Vexra ocular plasma beams are a myth perpetuated by Earth tabloids," she said coolly. "But insubordination is not." Jonah swallowed. "Understood, ma'am. I'll write up my own disciplinary report. Extra latrine duty for a month. Maybe 2. She didn't move. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Why did you send it?" "Because you're beautiful," he blurted, then winced. "I mean striking, commanding, formidable, elegant." "No, wait. Beautiful is acceptable," she interrupted, her voice softer now, "though dangerous." Before he could ask why, the base alarms erupted. A deep, pulsing wail that shook the walls. Red emergency lights strobed through the viewport. Jonah's training kicked in instantly. "Hostile incursion?" Viola's communicator chimed. She tapped her wristband, listening. Her posture stiffened. Scouts detected a cloaked vessel breaching the outer shield. Not human. Not Vexra. Her eyes locked onto Jonah's. The Krell. Jonah's stomach dropped. The Krell, ruthless mercenaries who'd sold weapons to both sides during the war, then vanished into the void. They weren't supposed to be anywhere near Xyrus Prime. "Get to the armory," Viola ordered. "You're with me. But I'm medics, not infantry. You're also the only human on base who knows how to recalibrate a Vexra pulse rifle mid-combat," she shot back. "And I need that skill if we're boarding that ship." They sprinted through the corridors, dodging evacuating personnel. The base trembled as distant explosions rattled the foundations. Dust rained from the ceiling. Jonah's boots skidded on polished alloy as they took a sharp turn toward the hangar. "You've been watching me," he panted. "Observation is part of command," she replied, not missing a step. "Even when I trip over my own boots during drills? Especially then." They burst into the armory. Viola tossed him a modified pulse rifle, human grip, Vexra firing chamber. He caught it one-handed, fingers instinctively adjusting the resonance coil. "How'd you know I could do that?" he asked. "My daughter watches you when you're not looking." Jonah froze. "You have a daughter?" Viola paused, her expression softening for the first time. "Lyra. She's 12 cycles old. She says you smile at her when she cleans the medbay." Jonah remembered the small, quiet Vexra girl with wide violet eyes who always left an extra nutrient bar on his desk. "She never said a word. She's shy. And you're kind." Viola slung a plasma cannon over her shoulder. "Among my people, kindness is rarer than courage. The hangar doors opened to chaos. Smoke curled from a downed skimmer. 3 Krell raiders, hulking reptilian brutes with armored hides and serrated blades, were already inside, cutting down defenders. Vaila moved like lightning, her plasma cannon roaring. 1 Krell exploded in a shower of molten scales. Jonah dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired. The pulse round hit a Krell's knee joint. It howled, stumbling. Vaila finished it with a blade drawn from her forearm sheath. "Stay behind me," she ordered. "No," Jonah said, reloading. "We've got better odds side by side." She glanced at him, really looked at him, and nodded. They fought their way to the landing pad where the Krell vessel hovered, its hull shimmering with cloaking residue. Boarding it was suicide, but intel suggested they'd stolen a prototype bioweapon from the joint labs, something capable of targeting DNA strands specific to both humans and Vexra. If released, it could reignite the war, or worse, exterminate both species. Inside the ship, gravity shifted unpredictably. Jonah's feet left the floor as Vaila activated magnetic boots. He grabbed her arm to steady himself. She didn't pull away. "The weapon's in the core chamber," she said, voice tight. "We disable it, we cripple their leverage." They found the core, a pulsing organic sphere suspended in a cage of energy. Krell techs scrambled around it, their claws flying over alien consoles. Jonah spotted the detonation sequence. They're going to trigger it remotely if they lose control. Vaila didn't hesitate. She leapt, plasma cannon blazing. 2 Krell fell, but a third lunged from the shadows, blade aimed at her spine. Jonah didn't think. He tackled her out of the way. The blade grazed his shoulder, slicing through fatigues and flesh. Pain flared, hot and sharp. Vaila spun, eyes blazing with fury. She drove her blade through the Krell's throat, then whirled to Jonah. Her hands, usually so controlled, trembled as she pressed them to his wound. "You idiot," she whispered, voice raw. "You could have died." "Worth it?" he gasped, grinning through the pain. "You're still beautiful." She stared at him, then let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You're impossible." Using her wrist comm, she sealed the wound with a biosealant spray. "Can you walk?" "Barely," he admitted. She slung his arm over her shoulders. "Then I'll carry you." They reached the core. Jonah, despite the pain, interfaced with the console using a data spike from his medkit. His fingers flew over the alien interface, rewriting code with a mix of human logic and Vexra syntax he'd picked up from late-night study sessions. 30 seconds, Vaila warned, covering the entrance with her cannon. "Got it," Jonah said, slamming the final command. The core's pulse slowed, then stopped. The energy cage collapsed. Silence. Then cheers erupted over their comms. The Krell ship systems were failing. They had minutes to escape. Vaila half-carried, half-dragged Jonah to the nearest escape pod. They sealed the hatch just as the ship began to break apart. The pod ejected into the Xyrus sky, tumbling through the thin atmosphere before stabilizing. Below them, the Krell vessel exploded in a silent bloom of fire. Jonah slumped against the pod wall, breathing hard. Vaila knelt beside him, checking his wound again. "You saved the base," she said quietly. "We saved it," he corrected. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Her touch was cool, gentle. "Why do you risk yourself for others, Jonah Rellis?" He met her gaze. "Because someone once told me kindness is rarer than courage. And I figured, maybe it's worth spreading." Outside, the twin moons of Xyrus rose over the crimson dunes, casting violet shadows across the desert. Inside the pod, the air hummed with something new. Not tension, not fear, but possibility. Back at the base, medics patched Jonah up properly. He was hailed as a hero, though he insisted it was Vaila's leadership that won the day. The High Council commended them both, hinting at promotions neither particularly wanted. 3 days later, Jonah was back on duty, restocking medgel when Lyra appeared in the doorway. She held a small, hand-carved figurine, a human and a Vexra standing side by side, weapons lowered. "For you," she said shyly. Jonah smiled. "Thank you, Lyra." She hesitated. "Mother says you're different." "How so?" "She says you see people, not species." Jonah knelt to her level. "Your mother's very wise." That evening, Vaila found him on the observation deck, watching the stars. She stood beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. "You never answered my question," she said. Which one? Why you sent that message? He turned to her. Because I saw you watching the sunsets too, alone. And I thought, maybe you shouldn't be. She was quiet for a long time. Then, on Vexra, sending a message like that is a formal courtship gesture. Jonah's eyes widened. I didn't know. Now you do. She turned to face him fully. And I accepted it. 6 minutes after it arrived. His breath caught. Does that mean? It means, she said, stepping closer, her voice a whisper laced with starlight and desert wind, that you owe me a proper date, not in a war zone, not in a medbay, somewhere quiet, where we can talk, and maybe you can tell me more terrible poetry. Jonah laughed, the sound warm and bright in the cool night air. Only if you promise to keep knocking on my door. She smiled, really smiled, and the sight of it made his chest ache. I promise. Weeks passed. The base returned to routine, but something had shifted. Jonah and Vaila were seen walking together during off hours, sometimes with Lyra trailing behind, her shyness slowly melting into curious chatter. They shared meals in the mess hall, argued over tactical simulations, and once, during a sandstorm, got stranded in a storage bay for hours, talking about childhoods, fears, dreams of peace that felt less impossible now. Then came the summons from the Vexra High Council. Vaila stood rigid in her quarters, the holographic message still flickering in the air. They're recalling me to Vexra Prime. Permanently. Jonah's heart stopped. Why? The Krell attack exposed vulnerabilities in our alliance. The Council wants me to lead the new integration command. From the capital. She looked at him, her violet eyes clouded with something like grief. I cannot refuse. What about Lyra? She goes with me. And us? Vaila looked away. Interspecies unions are complicated. Legally, socially, emotionally. Jonah stepped forward. I don't care about complicated. You should, she said softly. I am a commander, a mother, a symbol. You are a medic with a pension that barely covers synth coffee. And I'm the idiot who tackled you to save your life. He shot back. Does that count for nothing? Her composure cracked. It counts for everything, she whispered. That's why this hurts. He took her hands. Then don't go alone. She stared at him. What? Transfer me. As a field medic for Integration Command. Or as your personal physician. Or whatever title gets me on that transport. It's not that simple. Make it simple. Silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid words. Then Lyra appeared in the doorway, clutching her carved figurine. Mother, she said, voice small but firm. Don't leave him. Vaila's breath hitched. She looked from her daughter to Jonah, tears glistening in her eyes, tears that shimmered like liquid amethyst. Fine, she said finally. But you'll hate Vexra. The gravity's heavier, the food's bitter, and the politics. I'll bring extra synth coffee, Jonah said, grinning. She pulled him into a kiss then, soft, hesitant at first, then deepening with all the longing they'd held back. When they parted, Lyra was beaming. The transfer wasn't easy. Bureaucracy clung like sand to boots. But Vaila, with Jonah's stubborn optimism at her side and Lyra's quiet advocacy, pushed through. 3 months later, they boarded a Vexra cruiser bound for the capital, the desert moon shrinking behind them like a fading dream. Vexra Prime was nothing like Xyrus. Towering crystalline spires pierced violet skies. Gardens of bioluminescent flora glowed in twilight. And yes, the gravity made Jonah stumble for weeks. But he didn't care. He worked in the Integration Med Center, treating both humans and Vexra. Vaila led the command with fierce grace, her reputation now intertwined with tales of a human medic who'd bled for their alliance. And Lyra? She joined the youth diplomat program, her once shy voice now confident in debates about cross-cultural empathy. Evenings were theirs. They'd walk through the Lumina Gardens, Lyra skipping ahead, Jonah and Vaila trailing behind, hands entwined. Sometimes they'd argue about policy, about parenting, about whether Earth music was superior to Vexra harmonic chants. Jonah always lost that one. One night, under twin moons that mirrored Xyrus but glowed silver instead of red, Vaila stopped him on the balcony of their shared residence. You never sent another flirty message, she said. I figured you preferred knock-ons, he replied. She smiled, then turned serious. Jonah Rellis, stay with us. Not as a medic. Not as an ally. She took a deep breath. As family. His throat tightened. I thought I already was. You are. she said. But I want it official. In every way our worlds allow. He kissed her then, under alien stars, with Lyra watching from the window, her smile brighter than any sun. Years later, their home would echo with laughter, 3 children, 2 human Vexra hybrids with violet-tinted skin and curious eyes, and 1 adopted Krell orphan they'd rescued during a peace mission. His scales now softened by love. Jonah still tripped over his boots. Viola still never smiled in briefings. But in private, their joy was boundless. A quiet rebellion against a universe that once told them they shouldn't exist together. And it all began with a foolish message. And a knock 6 minutes later. Life on Vexra Prime settled into a rhythm that felt almost too peaceful, too perfect. Jonah, Viola, and Lyra had built a home nestled in the crystalline cliffs overlooking the capital's central spire, where bioluminescent vines curled around their balcony like living lace. The children, Kira, Torin, and little Jex, filled their days with mischief and wonder, their blended heritage a living testament to the fragile peace between species. Jonah still worked at the Integration Med Center, though now more as an advisor, training both human and Vexra medics in cross-species trauma response. Viola had risen to Supreme Integration Overseer, her authority unquestioned even by the most traditionalist Vexra elders. But peace, Jonah had learned, was never more than a breath away from chaos. It began with whispers, rumors of Krell warlords regrouping in the outer veil. Then came reports of vanished supply convoys, human and Vexra alike, disappearing without distress signals. The council dismissed them as isolated piracy. Viola didn't. One evening, as the family shared a meal of spiced root tubers and Earth-style bread Jonah had painstakingly replicated, Lyra excused herself early. She'd grown into a poised young diplomat, but lately, she'd been distant, distracted. Jonah chalked it up to adolescence until he found her comms log the next morning. Encrypted messages routed through proxy servers, destination untraceable. He confronted her gently. Lyra, if you're in trouble. I'm not, she snapped, then softened. I'm trying to help. Before he could press further, Viola stormed in, face taut. Jonah, the Krell have taken the Xyrus outpost. His blood ran cold. Theta 9, their base was gone. Wiped clean. All personnel missing. How? He asked. They used something new. A neural dampener. Shut down every system. And every mind without a single shot fired. Jonah's hands clenched. That's impossible. Our shielding. Unless someone gave them access codes. Viola finished grimly. Silence fell. Then both turned to Lyra. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what they were going to do. They said they just wanted to talk. That the war was a mistake. That they wanted peace. Jonah knelt. Who did you talk to, Lyra? A Krell named Vorik. He said he was part of a reform faction. He showed me logs. Proof that the old war was orchestrated by a shadow council on both sides. Humans and Vexra. Viola stiffened. That's heresy. But what if it's true? Lyra whispered. What if the people we trusted started the war on purpose? Jonah remembered old files, classified mission records he'd stumbled on during his Theta 9 days. Coordinates that didn't match any known battle. Orders signed by high-ranking officials on both sides, coordinating strikes that looked like accidents. He exchanged a look with Viola. They both knew. That night, they broke into the High Archives, a crime punishable by exile. What they found chilled them to the bone. Decades ago, a secret cabal called the Symbiotic Accord had engineered the human Vexra war. Their goal? To create a hybrid species strong enough to resist an even greater threat. The Voidborn, ancient entities from beyond the galactic rim, feeding on civilizations that grew too peaceful. The Accord believed only through forced integration, through shared trauma and survival, could humanity and the Vexra evolve into something capable of resisting cosmic extinction. The Krell weren't the enemy. They'd been pawns like everyone else. And now the Accord was activating Phase 2. They're going to trigger the bioweapon, Jonah realized. Not to kill us, but to force mass hybridization. Accelerate evolution through genetic fusion. Viola's face paled. The children, Kira, Torin, and Jex, all already hybrids, would be the first targets. Templates for the new species. Before they could act, alarms blared across the capital. Not invasion alarms. Containment breach. The med center had been compromised. They raced through the streets, Vexra enforcers already swarming the district. But when they reached the facility, the scene defied logic. Human and Vexra patients lay unconscious, their skin flickering with strange bioluminescent patterns. In the center of the ward stood Lyra, surrounded by Krell, but not as prisoners, as allies, and beside her stood Vorik, his reptilian eyes glinting with something like sorrow. "Lyra," Viola said, voice trembling, "what have you done?" "I stopped them," Lyra said firmly. "The Accord's agents were here. I led the Krell to intercept them. Vorik's people have been tracking the Accord for years." Vorik stepped forward. "We are not your enemy, Overseer Ross. We are your mirror. Both our species were used." Jonah scanned the room. The bioweapon, refined, weaponized, was embedded in the facility's life support system. But instead of activating it, Lyra had rerouted it into a containment loop. "She saved them," Jonah said quietly. Viola's rigid posture softened. She pulled Lyra into a fierce embrace. "You reckless, brilliant girl." But their relief was short-lived. A transmission crackled over Viola's comm. "Priority 1. Sealed origin." It was from the Accord. A hologram flickered to life. A human face, ancient, serene. Behind him, Vexra glyphs and earth symbols intertwined. "Viola Ross, Jonah Rel Lys, you have seen the truth," the figure said. "Now choose. Will you preserve the old world, fractured, weak, destined for consumption? Or will you embrace what must be born?" Jonah stepped forward. "We won't let you experiment on our children." The figure smiled sadly. "They are not experiments. They are the future. And the Voidborn are already here." As if on cue, the sky above Vexra Prime ripped. Not an explosion. A tear in reality itself. From it emerged ships unlike any known design, organic, pulsing, covered in eyes that wept liquid shadow. The Voidborn had come not to conquer, but to harvest. Panic erupted across the capital. Vexra defenses fired, but the blasts passed through the ships like ghosts. "Their technology exists outside our physics," Vorik said grimly. "Only the hybrid resonance field can hurt them." Jonah understood. The bioweapon wasn't a weapon at all. It was a key, a way to awaken latent genetic harmonics in hybrids, allowing them to emit frequencies that disrupted Voidborn coherence. Kira, Torin, and Jex weren't targets. They were shields. "We have to activate it," Jonah said. Viola's eyes filled with tears. "It could kill them. It could save everyone," Lyra countered. In the end, the children chose. Kira, only 10 but with her mother's fire, stood tall. "Do it." Torin, quiet like his father, simply nodded. Jex, the youngest, held up his small hand. "I want to help." Jonah and Viola linked hands, tears streaming down their faces, as they authorized the final sequence. The biofield surged through the capital, not as a plague, but as a song. A harmonic resonance woven from human hope and Vexra resilience. The children glowed, their hybrid DNA singing in perfect pitch. Above, the Voidborn ships shuddered, their forms destabilized, unraveling into cosmic dust. The tear in the sky sealed with a sigh. Silence. Then cheers, Vexra, human, even Krell, rose from the streets. But the Accord was not finished. Their leader appeared in person days later, not as a conqueror, but as a supplicant. "You have proven the hybrid path works," he said. "Let us guide it. Together." Viola refused. "We will guide our own future. Without secrets. Without manipulation." The Accord vanished, for now. But Jonah knew they'd be watching. In the aftermath, the Alliance was reborn, not as a military pact, but as a true union. Jonah and Viola were appointed joint stewards of the new Concord, with Lyra as youth emissary. The Krell were granted full membership, their honor restored. And their home? It became a sanctuary. Years passed. The children grew. Kira became a genetic harmonist, developing ways to safely awaken resonance in others. Torin followed Jonah into medicine, specializing in cross-species psychology. Jex, the adopted Krell boy, became a bridge builder, his scales now shimmering with the same violet as his sibling's skin. One evening, as the family gathered on their balcony beneath Vexra's twin moons, Jonah leaned against Viola. "Remember that flirty message?" he asked. She smiled. 6 minutes later, I knocked. "And now, she said, lacing her fingers with his. We knocked together. Below them, the city pulsed with light and life. A tapestry of species learning, healing, loving. The war was over. The real work had just begun. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the stars, the universe watched and hoped. Peace, Jonah had come to understand, was not a destination. It was a daily practice, fragile as glass and twice as heavy. The new Concord held, but only because every morning, someone chose trust over suspicion, dialogue over decree. He and Vaila moved through their duties with quiet determination. Their bond deepened not by grand declarations but by shared silences over late-night strategy maps and the way she'd always leave his favorite spiced tea steaming beside his datapad before dawn. But the accord had not vanished. Not truly. It resurfaced not with warships or propaganda, but with a single, encrypted data crystal delivered to their doorstep, sealed with the emblem of the Old Earth Colonial Senate and the Vexra High Synod. Inside was a name, Dr. Elias Vorn, a human geneticist presumed dead during the early days of the war. Except he wasn't dead. He'd been in stasis, and he'd just awakened on a derelict station orbiting the dead moon of Krylos, deep in the neutral fringe. Vaila's blood ran cold when she saw the file. Vorn was the lead architect of Project Chrysalis, the original hybridization trials. The ones that failed. The ones that created the first unstable hybrids. Her voice dropped. The ones that died screaming. Jonah remembered the files, classified even to medics. Children, human and Vexri, injected with experimental gene splicers. Their bodies rejected the fusion. They burned from the inside out. The project was buried. Or so they thought. Why send this to us now? Jonah asked. Because Vorn claims he's perfected the process, Vaila said. And he says he'll release the stabilized genome only to those who come in person. Unarmed. Unescorted. It was a trap. It had to be. Yet Lyra, now 16 and sharper than ever, argued otherwise. What if it's not? What if he's changed? What if he wants redemption? Vaila forbade her from going. Jonah agreed, until they discovered Lyra had already sent a reply. We'll be there. She'd signed it with both their names. 3 days later, they stood on the observation deck of a civilian freighter. The dust rose, chartered under false credentials, heading for Krylos. No military escort. No backup. Just the three of them, Jonah, Vaila, and Lyra, who refused to be left behind. I started this, she said. I'll help finish it. The station was a necropolis of dead metal, drifting in perpetual twilight. Inside, gravity fluctuated like a dying heartbeat. They found Vorn in the central lab, frail but lucid, hooked to a dozen life support lines, his eyes sharp with feverish intelligence. You came, he rasped. Good. Time is short. He showed them his work. Not on children, but on himself. Over decades in stasis, his cells had naturally fused with a Vexri DNA sample he'd kept as a control. The result? A stable, peaceful synthesis. No rage, no rejection, just harmony. I didn't weaponize it, he said. I cured it. He offered them the genome key, a biocrystal pulsing with soft light. Use it to heal the unstable hybrids still in hiding. There are hundreds, scattered, afraid. Dying slow deaths. Jonah believed him. Vaila didn't. Why now? She demanded. After all this time? Vorn's gaze drifted to Lyra. Because I saw her on the news feeds, standing with Krell, with humans, with your adopted son. You didn't just make peace, you made family. And I realized, maybe we don't need to force evolution. Maybe we just need to stop breaking what's already trying to grow. He died minutes later, peacefully, the biocrystal cooling in his palm. They took it, and for weeks, they worked in secret, locating the hidden enclaves of failed hybrids, outcasts living in asteroid slums and desert ruins. Jonah administered the treatment. Vaila negotiated safe passage. Lyra gave them hope, speaking their language, honoring their pain. Then came the night everything unraveled. They were on Nethra 7, a dusty refuge world near the Krell border, treating a group of adolescent hybrids when the sky split open. Not with Voidborn, but with Concord ships, official ones, marked with Vaila's own seal. Arrest them, came the order over the comms, for unauthorized genetic tampering and treason against the Concord stewardship. Jonah stared in disbelief. That's our authority code. Vaila's face went rigid. Someone forged it, but the enforcers didn't care. They dragged them onto a shuttle, separating Jonah from Vaila and Lyra. In the detention block of the Concord Citadel, a place they themselves had helped design, Jonah was thrown into a sterile white cell. No charges, no trial, just silence. Days passed. Then, a visitor, General Raskvale, Vaila's former second-in-command, now head of Concord Security. You disappointed her, Rel-Lise, Vale said, arms crossed. She trusted you, and you consorted with outlaws. Those were children, Jonah snapped. Sick children. Children carrying forbidden DNA. Vale countered. The Council fears what you've unleashed. Stable hybrids could destabilize the entire social order. Imagine a generation that doesn't need leaders, because they're born with the best of both worlds. Who needs stewards then? Jonah's stomach dropped. This isn't about order. It's about control. Vale smiled thinly. Progress requires pruning. That night, the lights in his cell flickered. A voice whispered through the air vent. Dad! Lyra. She'd escaped. With help from Jex, who'd used his Krell stealth training to infiltrate the Citadel. And Torin, who'd hacked the security grid using medical override protocols. And Kira, who'd resonated a frequency that temporarily disabled the neural locks. They freed him. But Vaila was gone, transferred to a high-security orbital prison. They're going to execute the genome, Lyra said, tears in her eyes. Burn every copy. Declare hybridization a capital crime. Jonah held her close. Then we get to her first. Their rescue mission was madness. A stolen scout ship. A hacked defense satellite. A diversion created by the very outcast hybrids they'd healed. Now rising up. Not with weapons, but with unity, broadcasting their healed faces across every public channel in the Concord. We are not monsters. We are your future. The people listened. By the time Jonah and the children reached the orbital prison, riots had broken out on half the core worlds. Citizens, human, Vexra, Krell, stood together in the streets demanding justice. Inside the prison, they found Vaila not in chains, but standing before the Council's emergency tribunal, delivering a speech that would echo for generations. You fear what you do not understand, but fear is not governance. Love is, sacrifice is, choice is. I chose Jonah. My children chose their identities. And if you criminalize that choice, you criminalize hope itself. The tribunal was interrupted by news from the surface. Millions marching. Ships defecting. The new Concord fracturing along lines of compassion versus control. Then the Voidborn returned. Not one tear this time. Dozens. Across the galaxy. Harvesting not cities but memories. Draining entire populations of their history, their love, their very sense of self, leaving empty shells that wandered whispering forgotten names. Panic became paralysis. Except on Vexra Prime. There, the hybrids, newly healed, newly empowered, formed a living network. Hand in hand, they sang the resonance not as a weapon, but as a lullaby. A song of memory, of belonging, of you are not alone. And the Voidborn hesitated. Jonah and Vaila, reunited in the chaos, made a decision. They broadcast the genome not as a secret but as a gift. Open source, freely available to any who wish to embrace it. Not to force change but to offer choice. The Accord, watching from the shadows, finally stepped into the light. Not as manipulators but as penitents. We were wrong, their leader admitted on every channel. Evolution cannot be engineered. It must be invited. In the end, the Voidborn did not vanish. They transformed. Drawn to the resonance, they began to absorb it, not as prey but as students. One by one, their ships softened, their weeping eyes clearing. They became silent guardians, orbiting the galaxy not to harvest, but to protect. Years later, Jonah stood on the balcony of a new home. Not on Vexra, but on a reclaimed world once scarred by war, now blooming with gardens of earth roses and Vexra luminivines. His hair was streaked with gray, his steps slower, but his heart full. Vaila leaned against him, her white hair catching the golden light of a setting sun. Below, their grandchildren, some fully human, some fully Vexra, some gloriously in between, played with Jex's great-grandchildren, Krell hatchlings with gleaming violet-tinged scales. Lyra, now High Emissary of the Universal Kinship Council, had just returned from negotiating peace with a newly contacted Waterworld species. Kira ran the largest hybrid wellness institute in the Concord. Torin had published a groundbreaking thesis on interspecies empathy. And the genome? It was no longer a secret, but a celebration, offered at coming-of-age ceremonies, not as obligation, but as possibility. Jonah squeezed Vaila's hand. Remember that flirty message? She chuckled. I thought I'd vaporize you. And now? He asked. She turned to him, her violet eyes still bright with the fire that had first drawn him in, now deepened by decades of love, loss, and triumph. Now, she whispered, I'd send one back. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of a universe learning to heal, a new message pulsed through the stars. Not of conquest, but of connection. You're still beautiful. 6 minutes later, the whole galaxy knocked.